Well, so in the prior few years, we saw, one of the biggest ever liquidity injections into markets in history, and now we're seeing one of the biggest withdrawals of liquidity from markets in history. And so it's unsurprising to hear that there are rather extreme anecdotes happening because we are seeing that show up in some of the numbers. I mean, the valuations that unprofitable tech stocks reached was comparable to the dot-com bubble. And the drawdown that many of them have had since then has also been comparable to the dot-com bubble. And back during the dot-com bubble, it was not like every sector was affected equally, right? I mean, there are a lot of the value sectors. I mean, they might have run into a few years of market turbulence, but they didn't have the extreme, price movements and liquidity movements that you saw in some of the tech names. And we've kind of seen a similar outcome this time, where what you see in tech and venture is like one of the biggest boom busts ever. Whereas what we're seeing in many other industries is not nearly that extreme. And I think what's also adding to it is that we have a historic bond drawdown at the same time. Whereas in most of these environments, you would have seen bonds do pretty well. And so a lot of investors have stocks and bonds, and they both went down. And so based on something like a 60-40 portfolio, you actually have a drawdown similar to what you see in 2008, even though stocks, in terms of the broad indices, have not done nearly as poorly, at least as of this time, as what they did in 2008.
Are there any facets of this crash occurring now that you could honestly say were completely unexpected and would qualify as a black swan?
I mean, you can. So a black swan is pretty much by definition unpredictable, right? And so there are low probability events that occurred. Like, I mean, I think the Russia invasion of Ukraine. I mean, the idea that it would happen right now this year was surprising to many, including myself.
Yeah.
So there's a number. I mean, the timing of the pandemic, a few years ago, things like that are possible to have in your kind of near-term models. And so there have been a number of shocks to the system, but there are always shocks to the system. Some of what we're seeing in this broad drawdown are not black swan events. And so, for example, if you look at the U.S. Purchasing Managers Index, right, the PMI is basically a measure of economic growth acceleration or deceleration. And that doesn't mean growing or shrinking. It means accelerating or decelerating. And of course, if it decelerates enough, it can outright shrink. And if you look at that long-term cycle, roughly every 3 years, you go through one of these gyrations where it looks like a sine wave with like a 3-year period. And, some of those drawdowns result in recessions, other ones result in soft patches. Whenever you have a declining PMI environment, which we've had over the past, 6 to 12 months, you tend to get a lot of these impacts of the system. And then we complicate it by the fact that we had the biggest inflation spike in decades. And so the Fed is tightening into that slowdown. And so a lot of things that are inherently unstable get tested and broken. And what we're seeing in crypto, I mean, it's always hard to say what specifically is going to happen. But for example, the biggest news event there is the complete unwinding of the Terra Luna ecosystem. And there are a number of us, including myself, that actually wrote ahead of time about the risks with that protocol. And so, I didn't say it was going to crash in mid-May. It was like, it's like, if you're worried about forest fires, you can describe, the conditions for a forest fire are looking very problematic, but you can't predict when lightning is going to hit a tree, right? Yeah. And so there are a bunch of people that are outlining there are aspects in the broad crypto space that are completely unsustainable, and that can be separate from your long-term view of something like Bitcoin. But basically around Bitcoin, there's all these other projects, and many of them are, basically they seem like black swans when they happen, but they were artificial to begin with. I think to see gold do particularly well, you'd want to see more. Right now, so basically we have a declining economic activity, which is generally good for gold compared to stocks. But we also have the Fed trying to tighten into this, which is bad for pretty much anything other than the dollar and maybe some really defensive value types of equities and things like that. And so I think right now the Fed's in a dilemma where they have declining economic activity, but inflation's still well above their target. And so I think the regime shift would happen if they have to stop tightening due to declining economic activity while inflation's still high. I think that's where you could see gold do particularly well. Probably some of these other, Bitcoin probably do pretty well. Whereas anything that still faces margin pressure from rising wages or that faces supply chain problems from, say, China, those things would probably still continue to have some turbulence in that type of environment. Whereas the things that don't have to worry about profit margins, like hard monies, can do pretty well. And then I would say furthermore, I think, obviously one of the challenges to gold has been that it's now sharing the market with things like Bitcoin. and then even the broader, even Bitcoin then had to share that with like Ethereum and had to share it with all these altcoins. And when you have every few years in that cycle, the malinvestment's cleared out, right? So anything like Terra Luna and these other things, they get cleared out. And so, I think if you were to look at gold and Bitcoin together, that's not really been a weak market over the past, any really decent time period, 3-year, 5-year, 10-year. If you have a little bit of both, gold does better in kind of risk-off environments. Bitcoin is better in risk-on environments. You don't worry about the market share dilution as much. I know that, for example, the folks over at Incrementum, they published the In Gold We Trust report.
Yeah.
I know they have it's like a fund that rebalances between, say, gold and Bitcoin, right? So they've kind of expanded their view of so I think, if you look at it in that lens, it's not really been that bad of a market for hard monies in general.
Before we continue, help us clicking that YouTube like button and subscribe now to our channel. This shows the algorithm that you valued this information. And it helps us spread that message. Sharing is caring. And now, let's continue.
I have bad news for you. If you're not rich by now, you're screwed. And if you're in debt, you're even double screwed. How so, you might wonder? Well, the sad truth is that you're working your whole life to make someone else rich. The mega corporations, the banks, the politicians, everyone is getting richer. They get your money. And what is even worse, they get your time, they get your life. You are not even in a rat race, you're in a financial prison. But what could a solution for you look like? Honestly, I don't know, but I know what a solution for me would look like. It's very simple. I use whatever money I have and I multiply it with 1,000. This could make my life much easier and probably yours as well. If you have $1,000 available and multiply this with 1,000, I believe that this could solve some financial issue for the one or the other. Of course, if you're ugly, you would have to multiply it with much more than 1,000. My name is Markus Dahn, and this is what I decided to do. I decided to 1000x my money. This is not a joke. I know what you may be thinking. What is this guy talking about? How should this work? This is not possible. Well, I made a detailed video where I laid out my plan. And some clever folks might even want to look at this plan and copy it and do exactly what I do. This is just a little hint on the side. You have two options. You leave, you forget what you have seen. You do whatever you're doing and you hope that somehow you get some other results. Good luck with that. Or you click the link below the video. You enter your email address because I'm not showing this to everybody. You at least watch my video on how I plan to 1000x my money. The choice is yours. Make the right choice. Join me. See what a different future you could have. See at least how I plan to do the 1000x. So click on the link below, enter your email address, and I see you on the other side. Your Markus Dahn.